Alright, we're going to learn about the clamp function and how to use it to make our typography responsive. So just to walk you through the code right now, I only have this simple paragraph here, and in my CSS I just have a bunch of media queries to resize this text on different text sizes. Above this I have some other stuff, but we don't need to worry about that. That's just some stuff from Tailwind and Next.js. We need to concern ourselves with these styles right here and these media queries. Let's see what this looks like. So you can see we have a headline here, and if I resize my screen, it does shrink right here, for instance. It does get smaller, and right here as well. But this approach has a few problems. First, it's just not smooth enough, because you can see it's like a sudden change right here. It's not smooth and it's not dynamic, and also it takes way too many media queries, way too many lines to actually make it work. So this is just messy and not really maintainable. So instead of this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove all of these media queries. I'm just going to comment all of these out, this one, and lastly this one as well. And instead of all of this, I'm just going to go, okay, I comment this one as well. Go up here in my paragraph and change the font size to use this new clamp function, which what it's going to do is take these values 2.25 rem and 1.35 rem plus 3 viewport width units, and lastly 3.75 rem. Now if I do that and save that, and let's go and see what we have now, and you'll see a change immediately. First, the text resizes itself without any media queries. As I resize my screen, the text changes as well. We don't have any more media queries, and also the resizing is a lot more smoother now. So with media queries, you have this sudden change in the text size, but with this function, you don't need to worry about that. It's all very smooth and very like dynamic. And not only does this look and feel much better, but it also takes up just one line of code. So instead of all of these media queries, all you need is just one simple line of code, and you can make your entire text responsive with that. So here I just put some values that don't really mean anything right now. What exactly is this clamp function, and what is it actually doing, and what do these values even mean? We're going to talk about this clamp function in CSS, and specifically how we can use it to make our text responsive, and as you can see, in just one line of code. And with all of the features that modern CSS has given us, we don't really need to use all of these media queries anymore. We don't need to use these for making our text or anything else responsive. We have a ton of other features just like this clamp function to make elements on our websites responsive without using media queries at all. And when it comes to responsive text, at least, this clamp function has become the standard way to write text on the web now, and everybody's using it. So we're going to go over what this function is, what kind of values it accepts, how it works, why it works, and how we can use it in any of our own projects, really. So the clamp function is basically a CSS function that looks something like this. If I go down here, and this is bad syntax by the way, but just to illustrate an example, it takes three arguments: a minimum value, a, let's call this a variable value, and a maximum value. And so it takes three values. These min and max values are basically the minimum and maximum size that your font size can grow to. So if you look at this paragraph, it has a minimum value of 2.25 rem, which means that this text will never be smaller than 2.25 rem. Same thing over here with the maximum value. We have a maximum value of 3.75 rem set over here, which means that this paragraph will never be larger than 3.75 rem. And this variable value in between, this is going to tell the browser how to like scale this font size up and down within these minimum and maximum boundaries. So to make this more practical, let's create a heading element right here. and I'll give it a font size of, let's say, clamp 2 rem, which means it will never be smaller than 2 rem. This is the minimum value. And for the variable value, I'll give it 6 viewport width units. I'll explain what these units are in a second, but for a maximum value, let's give it 5 rem. So this will not be larger than 5 rem. And let's go back over here and create a headline over here. And let's just say this is a heading 1. Okay, save that, get back up here, and you can see as I shrink this, it shrinks as well, and it will never be smaller than 2 rem. If I inspect this and go over here and find the font size, you can see it's 32 pixels, which is equal to 2 rem. And if I increase the screen size, it will do the same thing over there as well. It will never be larger than 5 rem, which is the maximum value that we defined. So let's talk about this viewport width unit right here, because it's easy to understand what the minimum and maximum values are doing. Okay, my text is not going to be smaller than this or larger than this. It's easy to understand that. But what is this viewport width unit, and what is this variable growth rate in the middle? So let's talk about that. So this VW viewport width unit basically means the width of your viewport, or basically your screen. So basically the screen size. And I can control this just by dragging this DevTools, or by just getting a larger screen. But this is basically the screen width. And the cool thing about this is that it can change dynamically with the screen size. So if I just remove all of these styles and let's just start fresh up here, I'll give my paragraph a font size. And we won't use clamp this time. We'll just say, let's say 6 viewport width units. Save that. And I can remove this heading. Let's just have a paragraph. Save that and go up here. You can see I'm not even using the clamp function anymore, but we still have responsive text. But this does have some issues. Since there's no like minimum and maximum values that we defined, this can become really, really small on small screens. Like you can see right here, it just shrinks into basically nothingness. And on large screens, again, since it has no limit, it can become extremely large. So it does give us one advantage, which is that it makes our text responsive. As I resize my screen, the text resizes with it, and we don't need any media queries, and text still resizes itself. But this does have two major issues, and the clamp function allows us to fix both of them at the same time. So the first problem is that this viewport width unit, it doesn't allow us to define a minimum and maximum value, which is why it can just shrink and grow to insane sizes, basically. So that's why we need clamp, first of all, to define a minimum and maximum boundary for our text, so it doesn't grow or shrink too much. And secondly, you can see as I resize this, the growth rate is way too fast. It's growing and it's shrinking really, really fast, and that's just not good. So we need to control that a bit more, and clamp will allow us to do that. So going back to my code, let's look at another example. Let's remove this and use clamp over here again. Again, I'll say my minimum size should be 2 rem, my growth rate should be 6 viewport width units, and my maximum size should be 5 rem. And now at the very least, I have some minimum and maximum values, and it's not going to go anywhere beyond those minimum and maximum boundaries that I define. So we've solved the first issue, which is having a minimum and maximum boundary for our text. Next, we need to fix the growth rate, because we don't want it to grow or shrink way too fast. We want it to be a bit more slow, a bit more dynamic. So we're going to use we're going to use a calculator online, which you can find right here. And by now you should have a pretty good understanding of how this clamp function works under the hood. It just needs a minimum value, a maximum value, and a growth rate, which defines how fast or how slow your text is going to grow within those minimum and maximum boundaries that you define. So to calculate this, I'm going to go over to Google and I'm going to type clamp calculator. And I usually just use this function calculator from Mark Bacon. You can just Google clamp calculator, and basically there's 100 others if you want to use something else. But this basically just takes a couple of inputs, and then it will give you a clamp function that you can just copy and paste into your CSS code. So we just need to fill out these four inputs. We need to give it a maximum and a minimum font size. We already covered that. Just look at what the smallest font size is that you want and what the maximum font size you want is, and then just put those over here. So let's say I'm going to give it, let's say 2.25 rem for the minimum size and 3.75 for the maximum size. And now you also need to give it the minimum and maximum viewport range, which basically just means how small or how large your screen is going to get. So for the minimum screen size, this is usually just going to be your mobile breakpoint or how small your screen is going to get. I'm just going to put 480 pixels over here. And the maximum screen size, this is usually just going to be your large screens or desktop breakpoints. And I'm just going to put 1280 pixels over here. Now, if I do that, this is going to give me this clamp value, and I can just copy that and paste that in my code right here. Replace this with this new one. And the cool thing about this is that I don't have to like figure out the growth rate, the optimal growth rate on my own. I can just use this calculator and just plug in some values, and it will give me the best growth rate for my text automatically. So if I go back to my browser up here, you can see that this actually does work, and it does resize the text, and it would actually look good on mobile and desktop both. And this is actually a really good size to have for a headline. It looks good on both desktop and mobile. Now, one thing to discuss over here is this rem value in between. We are adding a rem value to the viewport width units over here. Instead of just using 3 viewport width, I'm saying 3 viewport width plus 1.35 rem. And the reason I'm doing this is because viewport width units on their own are not accessible. So if I zoom in my screen, if I don't have the rem value here, the zooming is not going to change my text. And that's just not accessible. That's why we use the rem value over here. So if I just remove all of this, and just to show you in one more example, if I have, let's say, 1 rem 6 viewport width and let's say 3 rem of maximum size. If I save that, and notice I didn't add a rem value over here in between, in the middle value here. If I go back here, let's look at the font size that we have over here. And currently it's 48 pixels, which is 3 rem. So we're at the maximum size. So let's shrink this a bit. And now we're at some random value that's coming from this viewport width unit. If I zoom in my screen now, it doesn't change it. You can see that I can keep zooming till about, let's say, 250%, and it doesn't change anything. Once I go beyond 250%, it does zoom in and change the text size, but until then, it doesn't really do anything. And that's just not accessible. So to fix that, we need to add a rem value to it, and that basically fixes it. So if I remove this and go back over here, where we do add the rem value to the viewport width, and save that, if I zoom in now, you'll see it works perfectly. And if someone has eyesight issues and they want to zoom the screen in, they can actually do this, and it does work for them as well. So that's the reason we need to use a rem value in everywhere basically. And if we don't use it, it's not accessible. If we do use it, then we have a more accessible website. And with this handy little calculator that we have over here, we just need to plug in some inputs, and it will give us the best font value to use for our text. And we can basically just use this for all of our text, our headings, subheadings, body text, small text, all of it. And we don't need any media queries. We just need a single line of code, and we can make all of our text responsive and completely like reliant on the screen width for resizing. Anyway, that's all we had to cover. Use this in your projects, and have fun.